So I guess what I'm trying to say, if you'll bear with me, I have that information at hand. Just a moment. Hi everyone, it's me, Jess. I am here to discuss the controversy around the Scotiabank Giller Prize. I'm not the first person to talk about this controversy. It's been talked about by other people on BookTube, particularly Canadian booktubers. I know Jolene made a video about the Giller Prize last year, just responding to what happened during the Giller Prize ceremony, which I'll get to in just a minute. I had to educate myself a bit more about everything happening with the Giller Prize in terms of the specifics and the details surrounding the boycott that's happened having to do with the Giller Prize and actually other arts organizations in Canada, because they are funded by the Scotiabank. And I'll get to those details in a minute. I want to talk today about just where I stand now relative to where I stood before educating myself, and to reiterate that educating oneself about what is happening is extremely important. I think I fell a little bit victim to not informing myself when I posted yesterday. I went ahead and I posted the long list because I felt like I wanted to support Canadian literature, and the Giller Prize recognizes Canadian literature, and I thought I would make a video about the long list, quite honestly, but I don't think I'm going to be doing that anymore. Instead, what I'm bringing you today is just a breakdown of everything I learned over the last 24 hours. So as a way for you to be also informed about all of the controversy, because I think what happens, or I can only speak for myself, what I'm guilty of, and especially in this instance, is thinking, oh, right, there were some protests against the Giller because the Scotiabank is funding military spending for Israel. And some authors have boycotted. I was aware of that. And I thought, yeah, but still, I really want to support Canadian authors. And I was doing a little bit of a Pollyanna kind of, that's what I want to do. And I'm going to look the other way. Well, that's obviously a mistake on my part. And I think it's very important to learn from our mistakes. And that's what I'm attempting to do right now. And so I thought, well, if I want to obviously I can support Canadian literature all the time on my channel. And there are other awards, which I'll get to in a moment, that we can talk about for Canadian literature. I don't have a full survey of all of the awards prepared for today. Just to give you an anecdote, my daughter really likes instant coffee. My daughter discovered instant coffee. So last year at Christmas, I thought, oh, a great stocking stuffer would be to go and get her some instant coffee. And I went and I purchased a brand of instant coffee that I didn't read the fine print on. And I thought it was a safe brand. And when she opened it, she opened this instant coffee by this brand, and she looked at the fine print and she said, oh, this is distributed by Nestle, and we are an anti-Nestle household. It made me realize how easy it is to fall into that behavior when you really want something, or when you want to support something and you feel conflicted about it. I don't know, that time I didn't know, right? I didn't know that it was a Nestle product. I wouldn't have bought it. Would I have still bought it if it was the only instant coffee available? Wow, maybe. And then the question of, does that make me a bad person? So I went back from that anecdote, and to come back full circle, I was really grappling with, if I make a video about the Giller Prize long list, am I supporting genocide? And then I thought, wow, that must be a very difficult decision for the authors who have had their books nominated in these circumstances. So yeah, there's quite a lot to think about and quite a lot to talk about. Having informed myself, I think I'm coming down on the side of the boycott for what will become clearer reasons as I go through the video. But that's a shift from where I was yesterday or the day before. So I think that this is a challenging question. I think for writers, there are potentially ways that writers can be recognized other than through the Giller Prize, but I think I do understand why writers would want to be selected for the Giller Prize, why publishers would put titles forward despite the funding of the prize. I think it's a way for you to be recognized. I don't think it means that these authors necessarily support genocide. Although if you pull back and you look at the stark facts of the situation and you challenge people who are supporting the Giller, they have to contend with that question, I think. And that's what I had to do over the last 24, 48 hours. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not here to condemn the authors who are on the Giller Prize long list. I'm not even here necessarily to condemn the Giller Prize per se. I'm here just to clarify why there is a boycott, what the details of that boycott are, and just to give an informative video about the controversy. And then I'm going to talk about the books that I am going to be reading that are tangentially related. It's a stain, right? I've recently been reading, I don't have it with me, but I've recently been reading Claire Dederer's book, Monsters, and she talks about that idea of the stain. But I think that what's made people even angrier is the Giller's response to the criticism, which I will also get to in just a moment. So I guess what I'm ultimately trying to say at the head of this video is that I am not trying to make a decision for you. And you can be informed by the information that I share in this video and the resources that I share in this video, and then you can make your own decision. It's obviously a personal decision. It's a political decision. And it's going to be different for every individual. It's going to be different for every reader. And I think that we are all entitled to our own autonomy when it comes to our decisions about what actions we want to take. If that involves a boycott or a partial boycott or our own response to, or maybe it involves an initiative that's more of an activist initiative. Maybe people will want to get involved that way. I'm not sure. Or maybe it's just a call to be more informed, which it was for me. And then that helped me to get to a decision. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today comes from some information that was published in an article by a magazine called The Walrus. They published an article, and I will link it down below. The title of the article is How the Giller Prize Became Associated with Genocide. And what's nice about this article is that it walks you through the timeline, essentially, of the beginning of the boycott and where we are now. So this all began, or at least I became aware of it, just by coincidence. I started watching the Giller Prize award show on CBC television, which is the national broadcaster, and a comedian from a TV show that I actually used to work on and go watch the live performances of, called This Hour Has 22 Minutes. A comedian from that show by the name of Rick Mercer was the host of that award show. And during the award show, a group of protesters demonstrated during the television broadcast. And their sign said, Scotiabank funds genocide, and Scotiabank is the big funder of the Giller Prize, along with a whole lot of other arts events, including Hot Docs, which is a documentary festival that takes place in Toronto. And I know for myself, at my school, Scotiabank is a sponsor for something that we do with our students. So it's a very sticky situation. It's very difficult to protest these things sometimes. There was a very shocked response from Rick Mercer. He grabbed the sign, and I think he maybe even tore the sign, and then it was very awkward. The cameras panned over to the band, and I remember watching it and thinking, wow, this is really awkward and unexpected. There was like a shocked silence. And then a protester did shout from the floor that the Scotiabank currently has $500 million invested in an arms company called Elbit Systems. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that those arms are being used by the Israeli government for their war with Hamas that is, in effect, killing tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. So Mercer was pretty thrown off. And like I said, the cameras cut away. It was very awkward. Eventually, Sarah Bernstein was announced as the winner. She wasn't present at the awards show. She was off site, and she'd had a filmed response thanking the Giller for the prize. Well, let me just say that what I know about Elbit Systems is that it's a company that builds actually drone technology, guided missiles, and other weapons that are used by Israel's defense forces. So, and $500 million is a large amount to be funding. It's a huge amount of money. So the next day, the Giller executive director, Alana Rabinovich, made a short statement to the Globe and Mail. I've done a few videos on book lists from the Globe and Mail. That's our national newspaper. The statement said that the protest showed disrespect to Canadian authors and their literary achievements, and that organizers are working with local law enforcement authorities. And then later in an email that's quoted in this Walrus article, Rabinovich denied that staff had collaborated in any way and at any time with the police. So there's some controversy there. Eventually, the Toronto police did charge 3 people in their 20s with using fake credentials to get into the event. And they were also charged with interfering with the lawful use of property. Later, the broadcast was posted online and those interruptions were edited out. A few weeks later, Sarah Bernstein herself was set to be interviewed for Giller regarding her win. And she says that organizers warned her that any audience questions, because it was with a live audience, any audience questions about Gaza or the protest would be edited out. Rabinovich also has denied that, though. So ultimately, Sarah Bernstein actually dropped out in protest. Ironically, if you have read Study for Obedience, it is thematically about rebellion, so albeit creative rebellion, right? Then from there, an open letter from writers and publishers was circulated pretty quickly online, expressing support for the protesters and called for the charges against them to be dropped. And in addition, they condemned the unfolding genocide that was becoming more and more obvious in Gaza and Palestine. So more than 2,000 people signed that open letter. And one of the first people to sign it was Omar El-Akkad. Omar El-Akkad wrote What Strange Paradise, which I have a copy of. I have not read it yet. Omar won the 2021 Giller Prize for his book. He says that, well, actually, this book in and of itself looks at the experience of refugees crossing the Mediterranean and the violence and the despair that they're experiencing. So you know, it makes sense that he would protest this. He says he didn't attend the November gala because he wasn't feeling celebratory, given the catastrophe unfolding in a part of the world where he had grown up. And he was shocked to learn about the connection between Elbit Systems and the Scotiabank. So the Giller didn't really respond at that point to El Akkad personally, and he felt pretty betrayed. So he's quoted as saying in the Walrus article, actually, if you are in support, and I'm quoting from the article, if you are in support of the slaughter in Gaza, put out a statement saying so. If you are opposed, put out a statement saying that, he says. Because I guarantee you that either one of those statements, no matter how loud it might seem, is not as deafening as the silence we've gotten from the Giller, Hot Docs, and the slew of cultural organizations that have decided that it's only worth being brave when there are no consequences attached. I think this is a really interesting question because obviously these organizations need funding in order to operate. They have rather large operating budgets. I think that in the Walrus article, the Giller Prize and running the Giller Prize, I think they spend, their operating budget is somewhere around, I think it's like $900,000. I don't recall the number, but it's substantial. And certainly running a big event like Hot Docs would be very expensive. And so they need the support of funders. The pressure that the community has put on the Giller Prize has been to find a new funder. But presumably, if the Scotiabank is their main source of funding, that might not be something that's so easy to do. So then the question becomes, can we find, because I think the idea, at least from the authors, and I'll talk about a few more of them and what they've said in a minute, is that the Giller Prize is enough of a well-known prize that having that win without the financial gain, I think the Giller Prize started out being $25,000 and it's now up to $100,000. So perhaps reducing the amount of the purse, and that seems very feasible because you would still get the recognition that comes with a literary prize. But it comes down to the functioning of the Giller as an organization and what it needs to do to be able to run the prize. Now, I know that the BookTube Prize is not as prestigious, but the BookTube Prize is run completely by volunteers. So presumably you could find a way to do this voluntarily. I'm not sure. Maybe that is more of a stretch. But certainly I would think that it's not a stretch to be able to try to raise funding in a different way. Part of the goal for the boycott and by the protesters is to have the Giller remove Scotiabank from its funding, or alternatively to have Scotiabank remove its investments in this arms company, which is another interesting thing to think about. If Scotiabank wants to stay involved in the arts, and if it wants its reputation to be associated with these arts organizations, and if the arts organization want their reputations to be associated with peace or with anti-military actions, or at least not in support of genocide, then they're going to need to make some changes. And it would have been nice to have seen those changes made. So unfortunately, those changes haven't been made. And that is why most people have decided to boycott. So just to back it up a moment, because it's not that it has had no effect, because in the same Walrus article, which is very well researched, in that article it says that Reuters recently revealed that in March, Scotiabank quietly divested itself of half of its stock in Elbit, reducing the value of its shares to $237.6 million. And that was taken as a sign that this action was having an impact by those who were protesting. And campaigners really have vowed to keep up the pressure until Scotiabank completely divests of its investments. So I think that's really interesting as well. And that definitely tells you that there is power in this kind of protest. So I think it's important. In the same article, the other authors and other organizers involved in the protests have made it clear that the Giller Prize itself is not really the target of the protest. It's more the funder, Scotiabank, and the funding of this arms company. So if that were to change, things could change for the better for the Giller Prize. The Giller Prize has done a lot for writers. So the Giller Prize was founded in 1994. So over that period of time, the Giller has done a lot for Canadian writers. And so we can't lose sight of that. And I think that's important as well. But I do think that their response has been mixed and it's been slow. And I feel a little bit complicit because I just posted the long list. So, but that being said, I think it's interesting. Like one person who I would love to, there's a couple of people that I would love to talk to, okay? Because there's a couple people on the long list who I would love to talk to. If I had the money and if I could interview, for example, Katharina Vermette, who I have 2 of her books in her trilogy. She has a new book that's come out called The Real Ones, which is on the long list. That means that she has not withdrawn her book from contention. So I'd be curious what her position is on that. But I can't talk to Katharina Vermette, and I can't talk to the other authors whose books have been included on the long list. Since my decision is to boycott the Giller, I thought that I would do some reading that was Giller adjacent, because as I just said, I think the Giller is an important prize. I hope that they, well, there's more of an update. Since the long list was announced, they have dropped Scotiabank from the name of the prize. So it's, rather than it being called the Scotiabank Giller Prize, it's now the Giller Prize. And it is a bit deceptive of the Giller Prize to do this because it's suggesting to the world that Scotiabank is no longer a sponsor, but unfortunately, that is not the case. Scotiabank is still currently a sponsor of the Giller Prize. Yesterday, an article was published in the Toronto Star. I will leave a link for it also down below, which talks about this rebranding. I'll just quote from that article. The big bank remains the lead sponsor of the award, but its name has been removed from the prize title, Ilana Rabinovich, executive director of the Giller Foundation, said Wednesday. The rebranding comes after protesters disrupted 2023's ceremony to decry the bank's investment in an Israeli weapons manufacturer. Ultimately, more than ever, we want to ensure the prize stays true to its purpose, to celebrate the best in Canadian fiction and to give the stage to Canada's best storytellers, Rabinovich said in an email. For us, that means ensuring the focus remains solely on the prize and the art itself. So that sounds very weak, doesn't it? I think that's tough. The article goes on to point out that 2 international judges on this year's 5-member jury resigned from their positions in July. I have to find out who those 2 people were. My apologies, I didn't look that up before filming. And then we have this list of authors, and that list of authors boycotting the Giller Prize is growing. It's actually gaining more momentum. More authors have joined the call to withdraw from the Giller Prize. So Catherine Hernandez, for example, she wrote Scarborough, which was recognized by the Giller and has she has at least 1 new book out. Colin Barrett also has withdrawn. I will post the link to the list that I have in the description box below. Another author who's been very vocal in this protest against the Giller Prize and the funding from Scotiabank is Noor Naga. And I have her debut novel, If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, which I haven't read yet, so I'm thinking about that as well. So far I have two books on my Giller adjacent, my Giller boycott list that I would like to read. So Nora Nagas quoted in the Walrus article as saying, "There isn't a book or a film or painting here that is worth the slaughter of a single civilian over there, let alone 30,000, 40,000 civilians." 30,000 is what's quoted, but I think the number's gone up. Those two authors, I'm going to read their books, and then in reference to this Giller book club, because the Giller runs a book club, and a number of authors, in addition to boycotting the Giller, they pulled out of this book club. David Bergen dropped out of a Giller book club meeting because he couldn't countenance his art being used to burnish the reputation of a financial institution that was profiting from war. He's quoted in the article as saying, "My long-listed book is an anti-war novel, and yet it's being supported by an arms manufacturer. I didn't say anything, my hypocrisy would be immense." Also, an author who I spoke about in my last video, whose book I own and would like to read, Aram Shazia Hassan, also dropped out of the book club appearance because, and she wrote this on her Instagram, "My principles, my decades in the international development aid community, my novel which explores the ethics of doing good, do not allow me even tangentially to be associated with weapons." So I was pretty fairly convinced at this point. I should have been convinced from the beginning, I think. But I've already berated myself quite a bit on camera for this. And I still am a little bit remiss to treat it like a black and white issue, even though it really does seem like a black and white issue, because I'm also sensitive to the authors whose books have been nominated and wonder about their decision to have those books nominated. Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? That is where we stand with the Giller Prize. These are the 3 books that I'm going to be reading in support of the boycott, because these 3 authors have been very vocal in boycotting. There is a very good list of authors whose books have been boycotted. Like I said, I'll leave that in the description box below. I think last year there were 145 books submitted. 145 titles were submitted last year. 112 titles were submitted this year. So that's the size of the reduction in terms of the submissions. And I'm sure that there is more to add to this conversation. And I would love to hear what your thoughts are in the comment section below. I might try to get Catherine Hernandez's new book because I really enjoyed her book, although I'm not sure TBR wise if I'm going to be able to add it to the list. She is also quoted in the Walrus article. I think it's very interesting what has happened here, and I think it's always important to highlight the controversy. A number of people that I've spoken to have said that they plan on supporting the Governor General's Award as an alternative to supporting the Giller. And I would love to hear from other booktubers and people in the comments what you think about that. The Governor General's Literary Awards is funded by the Canada Council of the Arts, which means that it's funded by the Canadian government. So in March of this year, there was a parliamentary motion that came from the New Democratic Party, which was passed with the support of the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois and the Green Party, to halt arms sales to Israel after a non-binding vote in the House of Commons. It's a little bit tricky. The motion was passed, 204 votes to 117. I will leave a link to the Guardian article with this information in the description box below. It doesn't appear to change, it doesn't change really the position that Canada has politically on the Palestinian statehood, and that their position is basically that it should come from a negotiated deal, a settlement with Israel. The government previously said that it paused issuing military export permits to Israel and is still assessing applications on a case-by-case basis. So, I don't know. it's like, I think it's a fairly minor, or as is described in this article, a watered down, going to have a watered down effect in terms of moving forward, ending the Canadian government's complicity in Israel's genocide. So given that that's the case, I think, we might have a bigger problem on our hands. The Giller Prize question is easy to address. It's straightforward. It's simple. What about our government? What about the complicated deals that the government is probably making to buy from Israel as a way of supporting them? We certainly haven't boycotted Israel as a government. Our Canadian government has certainly not boycotted Israel. So I think, although I want to support the Governor General's award, I don't know how far should we really be extending this? And that kind of brings me back around to my little anecdote about coffee and the difficult landscape that we have to live in, that society and the politics and geopolitics that we find ourselves in and faced with on a daily basis, although they can be simplified to, this is a genocide, we do not support killing innocent children, we do not support anything to do with weapons, is tough, because in the end, we may not be able to take that position. We may not have the freedom. We may not have the information. We may not be able to actually fully take that position and act on that position any further than in what ways we can once we're properly informed. So I don't mean to take it deep, 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 but I think it's a tough one, and I think I grapple with it. I grapple with all of these things as a member of society. So I'm going to be reading these 3 books, Giller Prize adjacent. I'm not going to be making a video about the Giller Prize long list. I already posted the long list. You can certainly go find it if you want to. Just as an aside, if you're living in Canada, another idea would be to boycott Indigo Books, because Indigo Books, which is the Canadian equivalent of, if you're in the UK, Waterstones, if you're in the US, Barnes & Noble, has been known to fund the Israeli military as well. So make sure you're buying your books from an independent bookseller. I guess we don't know about the publishers as well. We don't know which publishers are being funded by whom, or what the profits from publishers are going to. That's something that we might not have access to the information for, or that we might consider researching if we really wanted to take our position further, if that is our position. So I was going to talk about a couple of other more scandals. I was going to highlight some of the authors that are boycotting the Giller. I may do that in another video, but I think that that's enough for today. I think I've covered as much as I want to cover for today. I will leave a link, as I said, to the authors who are boycotting, and a list. There is a list. I don't know if it's a growing list on Goodreads of those authors as well. I will leave a link to that in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope I haven't upset anyone, and I just want to be clear that I support Canadian authors, Canadian literature, and that I do not support weapons trade of any kind. If I am supporting it unknowingly, then once I understand what the situation is, I will adjust my behavior accordingly. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that it was informative. And if you have any questions, you can also ask me in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to help answer them. I wanted to thank Karina. She's under the username Time for Reading on Instagram, and she very kindly helped me navigate some of the information and pointed me towards some of the details. She pointed me, for example, towards the Walrus article, which I didn't know about. So thank you so much, Karina. And I hope everybody enjoys some Canadian literature. Maybe one of these 3 books. I'll see you in my next video. Bye for now. Hi, honey. What's up?
Hey, how's the reading going?
I'm not reading. I'm filming my Scotiabank video. Yeah.
Okay.
How are you? Are you coming home?
Yeah.
Okay. Love to hear what your thoughts are in the description box. And the quote, she was, by someone from she was set to be interviewed by someone from the Globe. No, she was set to, so